everyone. How are you? My name is Órla and I'm a storyteller. And usually when I tell stories, I don't bring a book. I just tell stories from my mind and from my memory. But sometimes if I come to schools or libraries, I will read stories from a book and tell you and read at the same time. And that's what I'm going to do for you today. I've brought one of my books along, and this is called Wild Waves and Wishing Wells, Irish Folk Tales for Children. And my friend Gala Tommaso did all the brilliant illustrations. I wonder if you can recognise what story that illustration, that drawing is from. It's got funny shaped stones and very big feet. Does anyone know? Then at the back, if you turn it around, you can see somewhere in Galway that you might recognise too. It's got yellow steps and lots of seagulls, and that's the sea, and there's somebody swimming. Do you know where that is? Brilliant. So today I'm going to read you a story, and I'll tell you as well. And it's called What a Big Baby. This is an old story, and you might know this story, but this is my version of it. You've already heard a story in this book, if you've read it, about the great Irish hero, Fionn McCool. Well, now I have another story for you. This particular story took place later on in his life when Fionn was older and he lived in a house with his wife, Una, and their little boy. Of course, Fionn still had all the wisdom of the world. That's from another story. And he was also very brave and strong. The people of Ireland thought so much of him that they called him a giant of a man. Now, it's true that Fionn was taller and stronger than most, but he wasn't really an actual giant. Well, not as big as the kind we think of anyway. But words have wings, and wouldn't you know it, news of this Irish giant travelled across the water to Scotland, where it reached the very big giant ears of Benandonner. Now, Benandonner was indeed a giant, as in he was huge. "Who's this other fella?" he said, while drinking his huge cup of tea with his huge giant hands. "Who's this Irish fella calling himself a giant? I am the giantest giant around these islands, and if anyone says different, I will challenge them to a duel." That's a kind of a fight. So the word went around that Benandonner wanted to fight Fionn, and the word got louder and travelled across the water to Ireland. Now, Fionn was no coward, so when he heard this, he accepted the challenge right away. "No man is too big for me to fight," declared Fionn. "In fact, I will make it easier for the two of us to meet." And he set about making a bridge over to Scotland. Of course, this was one way for Fionn to show off his great strength. His wife, Una, smiled at him. "Fionn, everyone knows you're strong. Let you just build one half of the bridge and let Benandonner build the other half. 'Tis only a fair way to start a fight, and that way you'll be home for your dinner and the pie I made for you won't be spoiled." "Very well," said Fionn. "Fair is fair." Fionn was strong and brave, but he was also smart enough to know that this made sense. And he didn't want to miss the lovely dinner that Una had made. Pie. He set about building the bridge. He wanted to make it strong so the fight would be on solid ground. He studied the way bees made their beehives. They were so strong and sturdy, and he copied their designs. He set up great columns of rock and placed them halfway across the water to Scotland. The fight was to take place the following week, but for now, Fionn was headed home. "No man is too big for me to fight," he said again. But do you know what? That wasn't quite true. The very next week, Fionn got a delivery from his cousin in Scotland in the post. It was a giant wooden crate. On the outside was attached a note which began, Fionn, you have to see this. Dear cousin, continued the note, I am sending you this as a warning. Inside this crate is a boot I stole from outside of the door of Ben Donner's house. This is his boot. For goodness sake, if the foot of this man is this big, you can only imagine how big the rest of him is. If you're going to fight him, all I can say is beware and good luck. Fionn pried open the crate with his axe, and inside was the biggest boot he had ever seen. Fionn gulped. Gulp. This boot was so massive, it frightened Fionn so much that he didn't want to look outside his house, so he pushed it over the cliff onto a beach below. It was so big that a little old widow saw it land on the beach, and she decided to move into it and live in it. She brought her cat and her chair with her and still had room to stretch her legs. Now, poor Fionn was really worried. His wife, Una, saw him worrying and brought him a big cup of tea and a piece of soda cake to cheer him up. Fionn, my love, she said, rubbing his worried head, of course you are so very brave and a great warrior, but if this giant is so big, he would squish you to mush before you even got a chance to take a good swing at him. Oh, it's true, said Fionn, but what am I to do? If I back out now, I will seem like a coward. Ah, you're no coward, she smiled. Leave it to me. I have a plan. First, you must build me a baby crib as big as a cow. But our child has outgrown the crib. What need have we of it? Trust me, husband, trust me, she interrupted and winked. So Fionn did as she asked and built a wooden crib as large as a large milk cow. Now we will wait, said Una. Meanwhile, over in Scotland, Ben Donner was preparing for his fight. He put on his fighting kilt. He went to put on his favourite fighting boots, but found that one was missing. We know what happened to that, don't we? This made him even angrier. He put on his second favourite pair of boots and began to build his half of the bridge over to Ireland. Una and Fionn could hear his booming voice in the distance. They knew they had only half a day before he would be there upon them. Una lit the stove and started baking a huge cake of soda bread. One half was normal, but in the other half she put 2 horseshoes. I am coming for you, Fionn McCool, roared Ben Donner, and when I get to you, I will squish you to mush. Just like my cousin said, squeaked Fionn. Ben Donner had reached the middle of the causeway, but there was no sign of Fionn. You can't escape me, shouted the giant. I will come to your house and squish you to mush. His voice was getting closer and closer. Quick, put this bonnet on I made for you and get in the cradle, said Una. Fionn jumped into the cradle, and no sooner was he in than the giant burst through the door. Where is he? Where is Fionn? Roared the giant. Oh, he's out, said Una, handing him a giant cup of tea made in a basin. Sure, have a cup of tea while you wait. Ben Donner tossed the tea back into his mouth in a single sip. Suddenly, a terrible wail came from the back room of their cottage. It sounded like a whale or an elephant. Is that some kind of wild animal you have in there? Asked the giant. Oh, not at all, said Una. It's just the baby. And with that, she lifted the huge cake of bread and a leg of mutton onto a wheelbarrow. I'm just going to tend to him. Come and see. Surely you're not giving that wheelbarrow of food to a baby for his lunch, said the giant. Oh, don't be silly, said Una. He's already eaten his lunch. This is just a little snack to keep him going until dinner. And then she pushed open the door to the back room and wheeled in the wheelbarrow. There, in a huge cradle, was Fionn, dressed as a baby. He grabbed the leg of mutton and began tearing into it with his teeth. Yum, 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 said Fionn, the baby. Burp. And he let out a huge belch that was so strong, it blew the giant's hair and beard up in the air. Oh, how rude of me, said Una, handing the giant the other half of the soda cake. To go with your tea, have a bite of this. Benandonner bit down on the cake and yelped, "Ow!" For little did he know that inside the cake were 2 metal horseshoes. Is it too chewy for you? Una asked. Baby likes it a bit chewy. And she tossed the second half of the cake over to baby Fionn, who ate it no problem. This was the ordinary half of the cake. There was no horseshoes in that. For the first time ever, Benandonner the giant was afraid. What a big baby, said the giant, laughing nervously. Aaron, not at all, laughed Una. Sure, this little doting is the runt of our litter. He's the smallest of the 10 boys. 10 boys, gasped the giant. Yes, indeed. And his 10 sisters are even bigger, smiled Una. With that, the baby, Fionn, picked up a huge basket of apples and tossed them at the giant, hitting him on the head with a thump. Oh, thump, thump, oh, thump. Play, said the baby with a deep, gravelly voice. Nice baby. What a big baby, said Benandonner, backing up slowly towards the door. For in his head, the giant was having many frightening thoughts. It seemed like this Fionn McCool had a small army of huge children. What would they do if their father was defeated in battle? Surely they would want revenge. And if this apple-throwing, mutton-belching giant of a baby was the smallest of the children, then what size must Fionn himself be? Benandonner was deeply regretting his decision to challenge Fionn to a fight. He was deeply regretting building half a causeway to come over. He was deeply regretting sitting in that kitchen. He had to think fast. Mrs. McCool, he said, I'm afraid that tasting your beautiful soda bread has reminded me of something. I think I left my own bread in the oven baking. I may burn if I don't go back to Scotland right now. Oh, you can't have that, said Una, smiling. There's nothing sadder than a good cake of bread spoiled. But are you sure you can't stay for another few minutes? Fionn will be sorry he missed you. No, said Benandonner anxiously. Please give him my regards and regrets, but it would be a shame to burn my bread. I understand, said Una. Say goodbye, baby. Burp. Baby Fionn belched again, with a belch so strong that it blew the front door open. Sure, perhaps my husband can go over to visit you later to sample your cake, Una started to say, but Benandonner had seized the opportunity to escape and had run straight out that open door. Down on the beach he ran, fast as he could. Boom, boom, boom went his giant footsteps, never stopping until he reached the giant's causeway. There he took a single glance to see if the huge Fionn was following him. Of course he wasn't, but Benandonner didn't know that. As Benandonner began to make his way across the causeway, a terrible thought occurred to him. What if Una's right? What if Fionn does decide to follow me across to Scotland? He'll do more than sample my soda cake. He will squish me to mush. And so Ben and Donner began to pull up the huge pieces of that causeway behind him as he ran and tossed them into the sea. Now he can't follow me, he thought. Of course, you and I know that Fionn had no intention of following him. Fionn was delighted to be at home with his lovely family, sitting by the fire, knowing that he would not be squished to mush that day. What a clever wife I have, he said to Una. And what a big baby I have, she said, taking the bonnet off his head, laughing. No, wait, she smiled. It's my perfectly sized husband. And they both laughed and laughed and laughed. Now, if you visit County Antrim in Ireland, you can still see the remains of the Giant's Causeway with all those beautiful rocks that look like a beehive. And you can still see the Giant's Boot too, where Fionn pushed it over the cliff. The old woman and the cat have long moved on though. And that's my story. Did you recognize the picture at the front? Guess whose boots they are, and guess what rocks they are. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.